today I want to show you how I built this drone machine setup in VCVRack, very much inspired by the Solar 42 synthesizer. So let's start by taking a look at the different sections. We will start with the first voice, a drone voice built out of 5 saw waves that we can individually tune and mute. Right, so in VCVRack I use the LVCO from Boga Audio, set this to a saw wave, and to get the 5 voices I used polyphony with the help of another module from Boga Audio. This is the Polycon 8. With this module we can send offset throughout the polyphonic channels. So since we need 5 saw waves, I will set this in the right-click menu to have 5 channels of polyphony. This will go to the volt per octave input of the LVCO, and now this VCO has 5 channels of polyphony. Right, and with the Polycon 8 we can tune them individually. You will see this also in a second. And we also need a way to mute the individual channels. So for this I will use a new module from Sikocell, the PM8 Plus, or the polymuter with 8 channels. Right, I will send the LVCO to it. Already you can see we have 5 channels of polyphony. And now let's also listen to this quickly. Right, so I can tune, I can mute, I can even solo with this, the different voices. Right, tune them individually, so I can mute, let's say, everything, leave just the first channel on. Right, and let's tune this, let's say, almost an octave up, let's say. Right, something like this, and then unmute the second one, leave it. The third one we can tune an octave down. Right, and like this create a drone. And again, I can also solo if I right click this. I can also solo the individual channels. Right, and then tune them as I see fit. Now, since this is a polyphonic voice, it might get a bit too loud, so I also use the VCV sum module. Right, so first of all, it will sum the polyphonic signal into a mono signal, so it will also take less CPU further down the road. But also we have here level control, so if I send this through the sum module, you can see we have a monophonic signal at the output. We have 5 channels, and I have it by default set to 20%. Right, so this will lower the level, the overall level a bit. Now on the Solar 42, we have also an envelope, right, with the take and release, and also a hold function, so the voice can just continue droning. In VCVRack, I use the fade module from Count Modula. Right, if I send this through the module, right, we have fade in, which is basically attack, let's say a second and a half. We have fade out, which is basically release, let's say 3 seconds. Right, I can also set it just to drone. Right, so now it will just continue like this until I stop it. Then it will fade out, which is basically release. We also have an external input, the control input, so we can trigger this or gate this also externally. And I also use the expander. In the right-click menu, I can add the output expander. So here we have access to the envelope signal, we have the fade in, the fade out, and so on. Right, so we can use these signals or these signals throughout the patch. Now, again, on the Solar 42, there's also a CV input for the pitch and also the pitch offset. Right, so this we can do with the FM on the LVCO or with the overall, let me show you this, with the overall frequency here. Right, so I can just offset the 5 channels, and now all we need is just a bit of reverb to turn this into something quite nice. The other voice we have is the so-called new drone voice. This one is a bit tricky, but basically we have 2 oscillators that can be used for frequency modulation, amplitude modulation, right? There is also a noise source we can mix in, right? So in VCVRack I used 2 LVCOs. right? One of them will be the modulator, so it will go to the FM input of the so-called carrier. I will set both of them to a pulse, right? So we have a pulse wave. We also have noise. So I use the noise module. By the way, the modulator we can also set to slow. Actually, both of them you can set to slow. So it's also an LFO. Right now, to mix them, I use the CV mix. Right, so we have once the oscillator and once, or the carrier and once the noise. And for the amplitude modulation, I use the AMRM, also from Bog Audio. Right, so the modulator will go to the modulator input and the carrier will come from this mixture of noise and the VCO. Right, and also here I use the fade module as a sort of a VCA and an envelope. Right, so this is how it will sound like. Let me bring in the oscillator. Right, so this is now the carrier. Can add some FM. Tune them. Add some noise. Add some amplitude modulation. Add something like this. Add some reverb. The last voice is more a musical voice, I guess, right? We have here an oscillator with octave range. We have volt per octave, different shapes. We also have an ADSR envelope that can also loop, right? So in VCVREC, I use the Pony VCO, the Befeco Pony VCO, right? We have here an octave control. We have different shapes. We have timbre control, so we can morph also between different shapes. And it has also a built-in VCA, so we can use also the envelope with it. And the envelope itself that I used is the DADSR envelope. Again, from Bog Audio, the envelope itself will go to the VCA. It also has a looping function. And actually, I also use the CV pad from Impromptu. With this, we can set different notes and play this voice. Right, similarly to the keyboard we have on the Solar 42. So the gates will go and will gate the envelope. The CV will go to the volt per octave of the Pony VCO. Right, and again, let's listen to this here. I have already some reverb. Right, so I can gate the envelope. I can set it to quantize and change these two notes. So here, let's say C. Here, let's say E flat. Here, let's say, I don't know, G. And here, let's go with F. Right, so I can really play this with my mouse. And again, we can change the octaves, change the timbre. Right, and I can set this to loop. So if I set this to trigger and loop, and trigger it once, let's say without hold and sustain. So now let me show you how everything works. This is how the final setup looks like. On the Solar 42, we have 4 of the drone voices, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Also in VCVREC, I have 4 of them. I have here a whole row with 4 different drone voices. There are also the 2 so-called new drone voices on the Solar 42. Also in VCVREC, in a new row, I have here the new drone voices, right? And also the 2 VCOs, right? Or the VCO voices that you can play that are a bit more stable with the envelope, right? Also them I have in a different row. right, the VCO voices. Now to mix them on the Solar 42, we have a mixer with level and panning. Right, so in VCVRack, I use the mixer from MindMeld. Right, and for each voice, I have a small interface with the patch master. Right, with panning, volume, mute, and solo, so you don't have to run to the mixer all the time. By the way, you can see that when I go, for example, on the mixer or on different modules, the cables are highlighted. I didn't want them to get in the way, so I used the cable manager here, this small module from Submarine, which means that most of the time the cables will be out of the way unless you are hovering on a module. And then when you need them, you can see exactly what cable is going where. Now on the Solar 42, we have also two LFOs, right, that we can use. So also in VCVRack, I added in a new row, there is a sort of a modulation row. I have two LFOs that we can use. There is also a joystick here on the synthesizer with X and Y. So here I use the XY controller from Vox Glitch, right? So we can control this with the mouse. And for the sequencer, we have here a 5-step sequencer, right, with a built-in clock that we can use in all sorts of ways. So in VCVRack, I use the Sec3. I set it to 5 steps, but of course you can change the number of steps. You can modulate the tempo just like I'm doing here. You have gates outputs, you have different rows that you can use. And of course, we have here also effects that you can choose. So in VCVRack, you can choose whichever effects you like. I used, of course, reverb. And also there is a dual filter here, one for the left, one for the right. In VCVRack, I chose to use the filter from Surge XT because within it there are many different types of filters that you can experiment with. But of course, you can change this to 2 individual filters if you want a different filter for the left, a different one for the right. Now here I have already something ready just so you can see how it sounds like. Right, I have here a drone playing the note D mostly, right? I have the 5 voices differently tuned and I can bring it in with the fade module, and you can see here it's panned to the left. Right, so this is one drone. Then I have another one tuned to a different note and it's panned to the right. Again, I can bring it in. And then I have 2 more. Each of them is tuned to a different note and I can bring them in and out and sort of play this. Right, so I can also perform this patch just with the mouse. Of course, you can also map things if you have a MIDI controller. I have here one of the so-called new drone voices playing a bass, right? There is some FM, amplitude modulation. I added some noise. By the way, the interface I have here has individual controls, level controls for the VCO and the noise, right? So you don't have to think here what is what. You just go to the interface and you have full control here. So if I bring this in, just a bass drone. Here I have the second one playing another drone with a different note. Right, and in this case you can see on the mixer we have the new 2, this is the new drone voice, the second one. And I have a panning modulation here with one of the LFOs. Right, so one of them is modulating the panning of this voice. Of course I can use also the filter. Then I have one of the VCO voices. I can play with the CV pad, right, and I can control the panning with the X and the timbre with the Y, so I can really play this voice, and it will set to loop. So all I have to do here on the interface, you can see we have on, this will just basically send a gate to the envelope, so it will just continue looping or just droning. Right, so I have panning. and timbre control if I open the filter a bit more. Right, so I can really play this voice. And again, the envelope is looping, so there is a bit more movement. Right, and here I have the second VCO voice being sequenced with the Sec3. No quantizer, no anything, just go step by step and set the notes. Right, I have here the Sec3, I have the CV pad modulating the timbre. I have also some panning modulation. Right, all I have to do here is unmute it. I can also solo this, by the way, directly from here. Right, I'm modulating the tempo or the rate of the Sec3. Right, and I can really play all of this lovely setup, and of course also the filter. Right, and create full textures and drones. Just like this, and that's it. This is the setup. Of course you can experiment with this for days upon days. I really hope that you found this video somewhat inspiring and you will go and try some of these ideas yourselves. Thank you for watching. Cheers.